We will be sending out the slides from the class, and that's why we need your email address. All right, with that being said, let's get going. So, our terminal objectives, you always hear this. The student on the completion of the course will be able to explain what diversity, equity, and inclusion are, and how a diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture can be created and sustained in a nonprofit. And you don't want me to read these, and I don't intend to. But basically, we want you to be able to define what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, what the benefits are. This thing called bias, you hear so much about it. To determine how diverse your own organization are, the efforts and activities that you can take to make your organization a diverse organization, looking at your boards and asking the question how diverse they are and what is really needed for them to be on the board. From there, what actions you need to go from where you are presently to becoming a diverse organization, how you sustain it, and then, as I said, being able to talk about foundation's roles in fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's what we're going to get through tonight. This slide does it all. We're done. Joking aside, what you see here is all the different things that we're going to be talking about and encountering. Things like unconscious bias, privilege, inclusion, diversity, being able to listen, the gender issues. All these things are part of this discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I have a question for you, and I'm going to ask you to put it into the chat box. What rules do you give to your children before they go out at night? And I'm going to just wait a few seconds and let everybody type that in so we can see what people think and what they're telling their young people. Okay, be safe. Know your surroundings. Be safe. Am I talking to the wrong crowd and nobody has kids? Call if you need us. Good. These behavior. Yeah, I'll go along with that one. Behave yourself. I tell my husband not to get lost. Okay. Keep your phone on. The reason I ask this question is I want to show you something that was put onto TikTok by a young man. This is an African-American young man who is African-American. And per the bio on him, these were the things he was told at when he was 11 years old. But it shows you a completely different perspective. Don't put your hands in your pockets. Don't put your hoodie on. Don't be outside with no shirt on. Check in with your people. Doesn't matter if you're just going down the street. Don't be late. Don't touch anything you're not buying. Never leave the store without a receipt or bag, or even if it's just a pack of gum. Never make it look like there's an altercation between you and someone else. Never leave the house without identification. Don't drive with a white beater. And for those of you who don't know that term, that's the old A-style white t-shirt. Don't drive with a do-rag on. Don't stare at Caucasian women. If the cop stops you randomly and starts questioning, don't talk back, just compromise. If you ever get pulled over, hands on the dashboard and ask if you get your ask if you can get your license and registration out. That's a very different perspective than what you just put into the chat box, isn't it? So with that, it shows you some of the issues that we're trying to address and that we're seeing for different groups of people. For nonprofits, this is from a study that was done in 2017 by Battaglia Winston. 42% of nonprofits are led by women, 57% by men. When we look at the, what's a good way of saying it? The different races who are leading nonprofits, 87% of them are white, 6% are African American, Asian Americans come in at 3%, and Hispanic 4%. If we look at another report, 89% of nonprofit chief executives are white, 85% of the board members are white, 27% of nonprofits are entirely white, or their boards are, 63% of board chairs are male, and 75% of boards do not place a high priority on demographic diversity when they recruit board members. That's kind of frightening. How does that compare? Think about this. How does that compare to the people that they're serving? Here in New Jersey, if we look down at the leadership positions, and this was from the Center for Nonprofits, which is the umbrella organization for all nonprofits here in New Jersey, 79% of the leadership positions are white. 21% are people of color. The deputy or vice president, 71%. And you can look at the rest of them. On the other side, look at the staff diversity by race and ethnicity. Again, if we look at the percentage for white individuals, it's 64%, Hispanic, 18%, Black and African American are 28%, Asian is 4%. Doesn't paint a very good picture, does it, about the diversity of nonprofits? Anybody want to make a comment about, wait a second, the numbers don't add up to 100? The reason being, and there's a legend on the report, and you can get this from the Center of Nonprofits website, is they asked, or they allowed people to put down multiple answers. So that's why you see the numbers are slightly above 100%. So what does diversity mean? Again, what I'll ask everybody to do is put into the chat box, what does diversity mean to you? Versatile, variety, different. And what's some of the types of diversity? Leadership styles, yes. Racial, gender, varied opinions and thoughts, good. Political, age, religion, socioeconomic, ethnicity, geographic, all those things come into play. They all change our perceptions of what we're seeing, of other people, etc. So this will just give you an idea of all the different types of diversity we could be talking about. Everything from disability to language to citizenship, gender, sexual orientation, physical, and the list goes on and on. So it means a lot of different things. And I want to come back up to 2 slides here. And if you look at the slide on the, or the image on the right side, at least on my right side, you see somebody who might have a disability. You see somebody who's old, somebody who's young, different colors, different backgrounds, different religions. These all come into this question of diversity. So let's give everybody a definition of what diversity looks like. Diversity is the condition of having or being composed of differing elements, variety, the inclusion of different types of people, such as people of different races or cultures in a group or organization. So I'm not sure we want to do this because we don't want to put anybody on a spot, but I want you to think about, how did your nonprofit rate on diversity? 1, not very diverse, to very diverse. And just think about it for yourself. If any of you would care to share in the chat, that's fine. If you don't feel obligated to it. But this is meant to get you thinking about your organization. Okay, so I'm seeing from some people, it's a 2, it's a 3. And I can tell you, I was at a convention one year, and I do a lot of work with youth. And I was in a meeting for getting youth involved in this particular program. And the question was raised to the group, what's missing? And what's missing here? And the group was consisted primarily of white males, older white males. And nobody could answer the question. They did not even see the issue until there was one woman who was one of the presenters who was African American, and she had to tell them, there's no diversity here. So you become blind to the idea that there isn't diversity. You just accept this is the way we are. Well, that's where we've got to change our mindset. Why is it important? We each bring a different perspective to issues, to planning, to things we do. And that diversity helps people bring out new ideas. And it helps to get people to better understand what other people are thinking, what other people are seeing. So it helps them become more creative, diligent, hardworking, and it helps with innovation. A key part of having a diverse organization, think about the people that if you're working with nonprofits, it allows a better connection to that community. You heard Barbara talk about being able to reach out to other people to understand what is going on and the importance of it. How can you understand what somebody's going through? You know, the old saying, walk a mile in their shoes. If you don't have that diversity in your organization, how can you know what that individual is going through? Just a real quick example. I live in Cherry Hill. My next door neighbor is African American. And I was talking to him the other day, and he said, and he's lived here for about 7 years now, he still gets pulled over by the police when he drives through the neighborhood. And he's not driving an old wreck, he's driving a fairly new SUV. But until I asked that question, I didn't understand his perspective. And that's where diversity becomes so important. So it allows you to understand how your organization and your policies and practices impact on the community it serves. It also helps with understanding the comments and the feedback. And then it may bring forward some unique solutions. I have a video that I'd like to show you, and let me get out to it. If you're not familiar with them, this is Admiral McRaven, who was a very key individual for the Navy.
During SEAL training, the students
Can everybody see?
During training, the students are all broken down into boat crews. Each crew is 7 students, 3 on each side of a small rubber boat, and 1 coxswain to help guide the dinghy. Every day, your boat crew forms up on the beach and is instructed to get through the surf zone and paddle several miles down the coast. In the winter, the surf off San Diego can get to be 8 to 10 feet high, and it is exceedingly difficult to paddle through the plunging surf unless everyone digs in. Every paddle must be synchronized to the stroke count of the coxswain. Everyone must exert equal effort, or the boat will turn against the wave and be unceremoniously dumped back on the beach. For the boat to make it to its destination, everyone must paddle. You can't change the world alone. You will need some help. And to truly get from your starting point to your destination takes friends, colleagues, the goodwill of strangers, and a strong coxswain to guide you. If you want to change the world, find someone to help you paddle.
Cardio burns fat, right?
My apologies.
No. Cardio actually burns calories.
Over a few weeks of difficult training, my SEAL class, which started with 150 men, was down to just 42. There were now 6 boat crews of 7 men each. I was in the boat with the tall guys, but the best boat crew we had was made up of the little guys, the Munchkin crew, we called them. No one was over 5'5". The Munchkin boat crew had 1 American Indian, 1 African American, 1 Polish American, 1 Greek American, 1 Italian American, and 2 tough kids from the Midwest. They out-paddled, outran, and outswam all the other boat crews. The big men in the other boat crews would always make good-natured fun of the tiny little flippers the Munchkins put on their tiny little feet prior to every swim. But somehow these little guys from every corner of the nation and the world always had the last laugh, swimming faster than everyone and reaching the shore long before the rest of us. SEAL training was a great equalizer. Nothing mattered but your will to succeed, not your color, not your ethnic background, not your education, not your social status. If you want to change the world, measure a person by the size of their heart, not by the size of their flippers. Several times a week,
What do you think? Does that kind of drive home the point about the benefits of diversity? So, with that being said, we've talked about diversity now. So let's talk about equity. And I'm going to read this. Equity ensures that all people are treated fairly under an organization's values, policies, practices, which recognizes and seeks to correct inequities so that people have opportunity to grow, contribute, and develop equally. Equality does not necessarily equal equity. And if you look, you can see an example here where people, and we hear about many young people, we're hearing it now, with the digital gap, where many students, underprivileged students, don't have access to computers, don't have access to Wi-Fi, and we need to be able to reach out and level the playing field. So that's what equity is about, is leveling the playing field and helping the people to get to an equal standing. I've got another video to show you, and what I'm going to ask is that not only do you listen to the video, but I want you to look at the faces of the young African American individuals and what do you read in their expressions. So let me cue this up. And we're going to take this down.
We're about to race. Everybody line up. Shoulder to shoulder. Take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up. We're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. It's a $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go! If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
Brandon, I'm going to ask you to unmute everybody if you would. I'd like to get everybody's feedback on what they saw. Can we do that, or they've got to individually unmute
I want
themselves?
to do it right now.
Gotcha. Thank you. I pulled a surprise on you. I'm sorry.
All right.
There you go. Good. What did everybody think of this video?
You want us to just holler?
Go ahead. Just be courteous of other people.
All right. I started to cry. It was so cruel what they did to the African American kids. If he was trying to teach a lesson, he sure did it at their expense. And they have things happening at their expense all the time. Why do it again? If you're trying to make a point, there's more positive ways to do it. About 10 years ago from where I was working then, before I retired, we had a diversity class, and she did a similar thing. Everything was about socioeconomics, etc. And so, of course, the couple of people of color were in the back and the rest were in front. And I raised my hand and I said, you were very cruel to them. What you did, you're trying to tell us that sometimes because of your status in life, be it socioeconomic, be it color, be it whatever, you are at a disadvantage. I said, and all you did is make them be disadvantaged again. I was crazy and didn't understand it. And so my boss and I were talking afterwards and said, she certainly shouldn't be teaching a diversity class.
Okay. Anybody else's thoughts on it? Okay. You can also unmute yourself. We'll give it another minute. One of the things, Laura, you want to speak?
No.
Okay. One of the things that struck me is looking at the faces of the African American individuals. When something really hits to your heart and you just literally want to cry because you feel like everything is aimed at you and you lock your emotions down. And that's what I saw in their faces, was they had no say in where they were, but this is how they were impacted by it. So again, we're talking about equity, where for many people, they don't have the opportunities that are available to many of us. And we have to take some type of action to give them that chance.
Ira, may I say something?
Sure, go ahead.
Again, it not only, I have to agree with Harriet. I can't even put my outrage into words. But at the end, the point was made that was a very stereotypical comment that again was very hurtful, trying to be positive. Oh, these black kids could smoke you. But it was such a stereotypical comment
Yeah.
that it upset me even more.
And you're right. Right. And this is why I want to bring up and have everybody talk about what they're seeing, because we each see different things. And you're absolutely right. It was a stereotypical remark. All right.
This is Kathleen. Hi, I just wanted to say I think it's a good exercise though, because it shows that people have all different starting points and that, you know, regardless of race, I mean, it showed as race in this, but regardless, I think people come from all different starting points, and that's good to recognize. And I think it was a good practice for that reason.
Thank you. Anybody else have any other comments?
Yeah, and I would say that for I'm assuming they're students, for the young people that were that turned around, he told them to turn around and you know, then look, you know, at the how the group was spread out. I'm hoping I sensed that hopefully that aha, that uncomfortable, you know, wow. Again, the starting line is not the same. It's not the same for everyone. Everyone, you know, brings something different to the race, has different different barriers to overcome. So I'm hoping for the young people that, you know, advanced ahead, for lack of a better word, that there was that uncomfortable realization. I know I felt uncomfortable as he was calling out each item that, you know, caused people to advance or not advance. You know, I was feeling very uncomfortable, and as they turned around, I felt very uncomfortable for them. And I hope there was that realization that we don't all start at that same line.
Actually, and I agree with 100%. Where I was made aware of this video, I was at a meeting with the head of New Jersey Department of Education, and he was talking to a mixed group of educators and religious leaders, and he used this to highlight for them the disparity in the opportunities that many young people throughout the state have. Any last comments? I'd like to move us along. If not, let's take a look at the next slide. And when we talk about equity, we have various different types of equity. Economic, we talk about it where different people doing the same job earn different amounts. We have people where their skills may be better and they're not earning what they should be. Health equity. The First Lady of New Jersey is focusing on the health equity issues for African American mothers where they're not getting the same treatment as Caucasian or non-African American women who are giving birth. Gender equity, we've talked about it, we're hearing about it. And racial equity, the Black Lives Matter. Social equity, where all people have the same status in respect to civil rights, freedom of speech, property rights, equal access to social goods and services, etc. So there are different types of equity out there. And we have to understand that not everybody is gaining the same opportunities, or have we even leveled the playing field to allow them to do so. Inclusion. It's the action or state of including or being included within a group or structure. And I think this little image below gives you an idea of what we're talking about, where we go from separation to exclusion to integration to full inclusion. So we have another video to show you. Whoops. My apologies, I did something wrong. I've lost the ability to share, it looks like.
Sure, we can just start it up again.
Okay. I'm very happy we've got you here, Brandon.
No problem. Is it throwing back something in particular, or is it just taking a little bit?
I'm not seeing the share screen capabilities.
Okay. If you look down at the bottom, and the taskbar on the bottom, along with mute, stop video, security, participants.
Huh. Even though I'm in the meeting.
If you look, right, it should be right in the main window. So if you're back with us, and right at the bottom, along with participants, chat, and so forth.
Okay, I've got the share screen. Got
There
it.
you go. Mm-hmm.
I don't know what happened. My apologies, everybody. There we go.
An inclusive environment is a place where talented people choose to work because they feel that they have a place at the table that really matters. What does that mean? Well, they feel they have a sense of belonging, like they're a member of the family, of the team. They're at the table, they participate, they're engaged, they contribute, as opposed to feeling like they're an invited guest at the table. When you think about it, if you feel like you're an invited guest, in all likelihood, you won't participate or engage fully in the work that's going on. You might be cautious, tentative, tend to walk on eggshells. You might feel marginalized, like you're on the outside looking in, and you're not truly engaged as a full member of the family. Maybe you're not sure what the protocol is, not sure what's necessary to succeed here. And so energy is often wasted in trying to fit in. Well, that's what it might feel like if you were an invited guest. Now, on the flip side, if we feel that we really have a place at the table that matters, then there's an opportunity to be a stakeholder in the work, to take responsibility, to feel a true sense of ownership. Someone who has a place at the table that matters will be asked for their thoughts, their ideas, and in return, they feel their opinions count, They feel their voice is heard and that they're a part of the team because they're included in decision making. They're more likely to take a risk, contribute a $1 million idea that may not be the norm, without concern that their invitation may be revoked. They feel like a member of the community. They feel like they matter. So what we're striving to create here at Duke is an environment where people across all of their differences and similarities truly feel they have
All right, so what we've tried to show you is diversity, as this table is saying, is about having people there, but inclusion, now now they're part of what you're doing. They feel part of the organization, that their viewpoints are important. So, fun subject we've all talked about, bias. It's a prejudice, whether we know it or not, and we talk about the unconscious bias against a thing, a person, a group, compared to with one another, usually in a way considered unfair. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'll be careful to sit up straight. Stereotypes. One thing about an individual, religion, looks, we tend to put a certain characteristic ahead of everything else. And that's how we classify somebody. It isn't a indication of who the person is, but because we've labeled them, now that's how we see them. And these are just some of the bias types that are out there. In the research that I did for this class, it identified something like 175 different biases. And you'll see on this slide, they talk about 150. Every day we're finding more. But the point is, we all have these unconscious biases. And what we need to do is recognize when we do have a bias, and from there, think about why we're thinking the way we are, and put it aside. One of the best comments I've heard, or stories I've heard told about this, is a man is on a subway, and he's got his two kids there, and the two kids are literally running wild. And the people who are observing it go, wait a second, why can't this father control his kids? And they're very negative against the adult. And then they find out the man had just lost his wife. So it immediately changed the perception of what was going on. So with our unconscious biases, we need to look at why we feel the way we do and try and understand what is going on for the other individual and do it with an open mind. As I said, so far, they've identified something like 175 different biases. Have you ever run into the situation where a person doesn't know a lot about an item, and all of a sudden they're talking like their whole world is this? Or people are accepting ideas that tie to their own beliefs? Or when somebody challenges you on an idea, do you hold on to that idea even more tightly? or you blame somebody based on their characteristics without knowing what's going on. So these are all examples of biases. One of the things that we all fall into the trap of is if we invest in something, we'll keep on investing, even when we know it's not going to work out. And then you think about, again, the scenario. There's a incident that occurs and multiple people see it, and each one brings a different perspective, brings their own biases. One thing you can do is Harvard has a program called Project Implicit, and it has an online test that you can take to see where your particular biases are. So these are just some of the very many biases that are out there, and we have to recognize it in ourselves. Another thing that happens, and the phrase is intersectionality, is where multiple biases come together, such as race and gender, religion, or age. An example might be an African-American woman is paid less than an African-American man or a white woman, but it's multiple biases all being directed towards a single individual. And we've all seen and experienced these bias extremes: racism, anti-Semitism, against the LGBTQ community, or we've heard with regards to this virus, it being identified for a specific ethnic group. All these things go on. And when you have the bias extremes, that's when people start getting physically hurt or actions are being taken against the members of these different groups. I want to show another video. And I think this is our last video. Nope, we've got one more after this.
Think about a time when someone said something about some aspect of your identity that made you feel insulted or slighted. Even if they didn't intend it, you probably experienced a microaggression.
A microaggression is something that someone says to someone else without knowing that it may be offensive.
It hurts. So that's how I know it's a microaggression, because it feels disrespectful.
And it's not like outright racism, but it's something that is like almost unconscious in the way that you view people.
Most microaggressions are subtle and indirect, but they occur frequently in the daily interactions of members of historically underrepresented groups. And most often, people who commit microaggressions think of themselves as well-intentioned, non-racist, non-sexist people. They do not realize that the underlying messages communicated by their actions or comments are hurtful to other people.
One of my friends asked if my parents had their papers. I had a science teacher, a physics teacher, and he told me that I was the smartest black girl in his class. I've been asked if I understood what they were talking about, or like, do you need any translation and stuff just based on my name?
Like, I'm not the spokesperson for the whole black community, but that's a microaggression I do experience a lot. Like, they want the black perspective, and I'm usually the only black girl in the class. So it's like, okay, what's your take on this?
Oftentimes I get asked, do you know how to speak your native language? And when I answer I do, it's just like, they're like, okay, well, what does Chinchao mean?
There are 3 types of microaggressions: micro-assaults, micro-insults, and micro-invalidations. A micro-assault is similar to what we think of as overt discrimination. In the case of micro-assaults, those acts are intentional.
I was a server for a long time, and if anyone else was, you know this. In the back of the kitchen, like when someone gets a table of, like say, Indian people, I hope this is PC, I don't know all the terms, but like Indian people or black people or anyone, they'd be like, who wants that table? I don't want it, they're not gonna tip. And my heart would break every time.
I used to be a server too, and I hated it because I was like the only person of like, you know, any type of race other than white. I remember coming in and they'd be like, oh, Danielle, you get that that table of raccoons. And I was like, what? And they were like, yeah. And then I would go and I'm like, they're black people. And I was like, wait, is that what you call black people? You call them raccoons?
A micro assault can be the deliberate posting of swastikas, Confederate flags, racial slurs or epithets that are left on a blackboard in a classroom.
I work as a research assistant, and so a while ago, one of the our new RAs, when I was a few months into it, came up to me and just mentioned that even though we'd known each other for months at that point, you know, you're the least scary black guy I've ever met. You know, in the way that I dress, the way that I talk, the way that I speak, I've kind of tailored that over the course of my education to be non-threatening.
I will literally have like my keys in my hand, like they're always with me, and I'll just like jingle them as I'm walking so that they know that I know that I'm there, so that we both know that I'm right here and I'm not gonna try and do anything to be stupid. But on that note, there's also the stigma that like we're aggressive and intimidating.
It's sad you have to make sure you let people know you're not a threat. And that's objective.
One of my friends commented to me, he said, you know, I don't really even think you're black, you know, and I was like, what? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I mean, you're smart, you do your work, yes, you're athletic, but you do your work, you're smart. So I don't really know if you're black. I was like, I didn't understand. It made me question who I was and if I was still a part of the culture.
And that's an example of micro invalidation and a micro insult. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit more. A micro insult is a comment that communicates the demographic group is not respected, that that person is a slight exception to the stereotype. It's an insult, even though the perpetrator thinks he has just rendered a compliment.
Well, here at UNT, I've heard, you're so pretty for a black girl. I feel like it discounts me as a person, and then I feel like it discounts
I would have loved to have gone through this whole video, and you'll be able to do it when we send you the slides. But it points out how things that we may think or say may carry insults to people. I'm going to use a phrase and I'm going to get yelled at, but how many of you have heard the term "Jew you down"? Well, that's one that I know gets me very upset. But you find these remarks by people where they don't even think about it. I was away at a convention one time, and if you haven't gathered already, I'm Jewish, I admit to it, but they had a buffet type dinner, and everything had ham and pork in it. And when I commented to the people who arranged for the dinner, and I've known them for years and they've known me, some gentleman said, oh, go try it, you'll enjoy it, without any consideration of, wait a second, it's not something within my belief structure, something that I'm not going to do. So just to give you an example, and then here's some other examples. Did anybody recently read about where, what was it, I think Walmart said that they were not going to lock up the African-American beauty products where they used to keep them under lock and key? There's an example. Or you continue to mispronounce somebody's name after they've corrected you multiple times. Or possibly you have an African American shopper in a store, an employee is following them around. And it's just things like that. So you need to think about what you're saying and to the people who you're saying it to, because you don't know how they're going to be affected by it. This video is a little bit over the top, but I think it'll bring forward another point.
Today is our day.
I really hope so.
Apologies for being late. So, if you guys want to adopt, the cost is going to be $2,500. $2,500?
Sir, all we have is $1,000.
Please, is there any way you can help us? I'm sorry, it's just not possible. Please, sir. We've been wanting to adopt for years. Look, if you can't pay the...
Sorry.
No, that's okay. He always does that. He's fine. Well, what about him? Oh, you don't want that kid. He has a physical disability. He'll never be able to walk straight the rest of his life. Look, you seem like a really nice couple. So between us, you don't want that kid. He's practically worthless. You could have him for free.
Here's $1,000 up front. And we will make payments every single month until the full $2,500 is paid and not a penny less. I haven't been able to walk straight my entire life. And I thank God that nobody gave up on me or thought I was worthless. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Darman has a whole group of videos relating to how people relate to each other, and many of them are over the top, and this one was also. But it points out how some people view people with disabilities, and once you get to know the people, you'd be amazed at what they can accomplish. So just prejudging them by the fact that they may have a physical or other type of disability isn't fair. In fact, I just heard NASA is employing people with autism because of their ability to focus. So again, here's another type of bias. I'll tell you what, we've been at this an hour. You ready for a break? Let's take a 5-minute break and we'll start up again. I have 7:10. We'll start at 7:15. Sound good? Mike, how are we doing? You're on mute. Still on mute.
I think we're doing okay. Just want to make sure that we have the recording. It will be a long one. It'll take a long, once it's done, we need to basically convert it. I don't know in what, you basically can record to the cloud or you can record to your desktop cloud. But I do it, I record to my desktop cloud because I want to post it. And it's, you know, it's classroom video, so I'm posting it to my YouTube channel for my classes.
Okay.
But you should work out with Brandon how we're going to get that and how we're going to move it around, because it's going to be an extremely large MP4 file. And it's probably going to have to go by Dropbox. I'm sure you won't be able to, you know, email it or whatever, but maybe Nicole and Brandon can talk about how to do that, since Nicole would have to get it to Lou to get it uploaded. And I would remind people to please give us their, you know, the email address that they look at all the time, so that we have a way to.
I think they're in the chat box already, but I'll remind them.
All right.
I'm going to walk away for a minute. I'll be right back.
Okay. We doing okay, Brandon? I guess we are.
Oh, Barbara, what do you think so far?
I'm fascinated. It puts a new perspective on something that has been on my mind for a long time, Ira. I need time to digest this. It's funny. I used to joke that when I went back to grad school, I came in with a disability. I was an undergrad music major and I got my doctorate in physics. And
I'll offer my sympathy. I have my bachelor's in physics.
And it was And it was very difficult to persuade the university, first of all, to let me in because I was a woman and I was older. And I said, hey, let's talk about all of these biases that you have. But the real problem was that my disability was that I was an undergrad music major. They didn't think I could do it.
Okay. Well, it's funny, when I was doing my graduate work, or they were looking for a new department head, and one of the candidates was blind, and he gave such a fantastic talk. They asked for our input, the graduate students in the program, and this man, hands down, was, at least in my opinion, one of the best candidates there were. They chose somebody else, but people tend to get focused on a person's disability and they don't see the other capabilities, and that's the shame.
It is. And I think that I'm proud of the fact that I think I broke a ceiling. It was not a glass ceiling, it was a concrete ceiling. And I'm very pleased to see that so many more women are interested in STEM careers at this point. It was not easy.
No, and it still isn't. I exist in the aviation world quite a bit, and they've got a program called Girls in Aviation, which is a single day in September or October. But you talk to some of the women pilots about what they experienced and the battle they had to go through to be accepted. It's amazing, and we're still seeing it.
Yeah. No, I understand.
We'll get into a little bit more about some of my own personal interactions as we get further in. How's the pace been?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good with the pace. One thing that is so interesting is I spent a lot of my career being an expat. Things are very different here in the United States.
You're going to want to talk to Leslie afterwards. She has a tremendous experience. She's been with the UN and been in many different countries, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it was a challenge. It was the first time in my life that I had lived alone and had to learn the languages. I mean, I worked at a technical level. One of my big customers was NATO, and it was, they always looked first to see where the real person was. I was just the assistant.
Yep. That was one of those microaggressions that was there that I didn't read, which is
I don't think it was a microaggression. I think it was simply the way it was. And I don't view that piece as microaggression. It was an educational process. So, hey, this is not new. I've been retired for just a couple years, but this was a while ago. So, no blame.
I need to get us started again, so.
Ira, before you do that, just one comment.
Yeah.
The video, the guy who was prepping people for the race, which generated so much negative comment about the speaker and his treatment of the young men of color in the group, reminded me that Leadership New Jersey uses something they call the walk to the wall every year for the 50 people that they put in their classes. And a long time ago when I did it, and it was a very diverse group to begin with, among the many interesting outcomes, and this was 50 people in a big parking lot answering a whole lot more questions than were posed in that video. The group that was the most disadvantaged was at the back. I mean, the white guys were up by the wall. They had made the progress. The people in the back were basically overweight white women.
Interesting.
Just a random observation.
Well, I want to get us going because I want to get the panel up and give them a chance to talk and answer questions, etc. So let's go ahead. All right. Hopefully everybody's back. Everybody's had a chance to take care of whatever they need to, and we'll move on. Some other terms you're going to hear, and we've heard a lot of them of late, is this idea of privilege, where it doesn't matter who you are or what you are, but privilege is something that's come to your social group and you're taking advantage of it. We've heard the phrase white privilege, where you get advantages if you're Caucasian, and you don't see it if you're part of different racial organizations, and you don't even think about it. And then the idea of oppression, the systematic and pervasive nature of social inequality that's in our social institutions. We heard something similar to that recently when a certain individual made a remark about, well, I'm going to save the suburbs, because they were talking about taking away some laws and protection. But it's a systematic discrimination. It includes personal bias, bigotry, etc. Another phrase that you're going to hear in a few seconds. Come on. There we go. So here's some other terms, and this is a set of legal terms. These are protected classes under the law. Race, color, religion, or creed, national origin or ancestry, sex, age, physical, mental disability, veteran status, and genetic information and citizenship. So these are a legal term where they are protected classes. So you have under the law the ability to bring civil suits under this. Some other diversity terms: ally, somebody who supports a group other than their own. And it could be any one of the basic racial, gender, faith, so on and so forth. Allies, they recognize that groups are disadvantaged and are oppressed, but it isn't theirs, it's somebody else's. They're willing to take risk and support other people. They want to reduce their, and they say complicity or collusion. Bottom line is they're willing to take that step forward and say, wait a second, this isn't right. And they continue to try and understand and gain more awareness of what's going on. Another phrase I've heard recently is accomplice, which is an ally on steroids, but it's the same basic idea. Some other terms: cultural appropriation. And the two top pictures are what we were talking about, where people take something of a culture and adopt it without accepting the culture. Culture appreciation, we all love different types of food, and it leads us into learning about different cultures and honoring those cultures. You think about the Washington Redskins and the fact that they finally got away with changing their name because their name was offensive to Native Americans. So we want to get to the point of knowing the other cultures are out there, recognizing them, and accepting that that's part of their personal lifestyle. You saw this in a way when they were talking about microaggressions in the classroom. First is, hey, these people don't matter. Their culture doesn't matter. That's the denial. Or it's, well, my culture is better than yours. And you hear a lot of that with regards to racism. I was in a conference the other day where we were talking about different cultures being oppressed. And one person came out and said, everyone's diverse, which kind of hides the whole idea that, wait a second, there is something unique about every individual's culture. The acceptance part, we do recognize that there are other cultures and they have things of value in their cultures that we could learn from. And then the next step is not only accepting it, but looking at it from somebody else's point of view. And then the last part is allyship, which is now I'm supporting these other cultures, these other individuals who don't look like me or don't behave like me. Okay, who's a Star Trek fan? But the point of this is if you ever watch Star Trek and you saw a Borg cube, their statement is, we will assimilate you. You will become part of us. Well, wait a second, diversity and inclusion. Yes, we become part of you, but you allow me to be an individual. I bring my own knowledge and skills and beliefs, culture, etc. to whatever it is that I'm doing, to the organization. All right. So in the past, there have been historical diversity efforts. We know affirmative action where they set very specific limits. Our targets for people of different races, different cultures to be part of organizations, groups, etc. We've had valuing differences training where we are supposed to learn respect for other cultures, other races, other ethnicities. And then lastly is managing diversity. And this leads us to where we're going to be going in a few minutes, which is trying to attract a diverse workforce, training them, and giving them an opportunity to advance and retaining them. The problem was that too often we bring in an individual and we never valued them. They were there, they were a check mark on a box, and they weren't really provided an opportunity. We've seen many times where an organization has a great hiring program, they're bringing in lots of diverse people, and then they leave in a few years because there's no opportunities for them. They're not really accepted within the organization. So now we get to the part of how do we get to this state of diversity for our nonprofit? So we're going to look at the various stages. I'm not going to read these through because I want to get into them quickly. So the first thing is we want to look at our own organization. How diverse is it? What's the board look like? What's leadership look like? What's departments look like? The staff and the volunteers. Remember those first surveys that we looked at where the leadership, the boards were all white or a very high percentage of white. Something you want to ask yourself, especially with a nonprofit, is your organization representative of the general population? Is it representative of your local community? How about the people you serve? Because if you aren't representative of especially your community and the people you serve, how can you understand what they're going through, what their needs are? You want to ask yourself some questions. Is your organization focused on diversity? And these are some basic categories that I've pulled out to look at. The next couple slides, I'm not going to read in depth, but this gives you a basic assessment tool. And I have a list of other organizations and other assessment tools that you can reference later on the slide. And I'm just wanted to let you know, but these are just some examples. First and foremost, does your organization have a diversity statement that's aligned with your company's mission, vision, and core values? I belong to an international organization, and I raised the question recently to them, are you going to be putting together a diversity task force? Because I'd like to be on it. And the answer came back to me that, well, we're letting our own chapters look into it, and we'll see what they do. The problem is that the national or international headquarters needs to set the tone for the organization. And if they don't, are people going to think it's important? And the answer is probably not. Does management support the organization's commitment to diversity? If you don't get management's buy-in, they're the ones who set the tone. And if they're not willing to support it and they're not passing it down to the employees and the rest of the organization, where are you going to go with it? And lastly, and there's others here, but have you built diversity into your strategic business goals? Because if it isn't, you're just waving the flag and it doesn't really mean anything. You've got to have it all inclusive into your organization. I'm getting up on my high horse. For leadership, and this is the same thing, is there a business case for diversity, and has it been communicated as to why it's important? If you haven't said why this is important to us, why it's good for the business, nobody's going to follow it. They're just going to keep going, doing what they're going to do. Again, same type of thing. Senior management, does it talk about and regularly communicate the importance of diversity? If they're not talking about it, people are just going to hunker down and do like they've always done. Is there a chief diversity officer responsible for the program, and do they have the resources? One of the biggest reasons why diversity programs fail is the company will say, you're the diversity officer, but they don't give them any of the resources or authority to implement the program. So how do they expect it to succeed? And are managers held to specific goals for diversity? Hiring practices. Oh yeah, we hired so many of this group or so many of that group. Wait a second. Let's start out with the first thing. What are the requirements? Are they truly requirements for the position, or is it just somebody's want to have? When you're going out, are you offering the position or making the people aware, especially underrepresented employees, of the possibility of applying for these positions? Where is the recruiting being done? Is it being done at the country club down the road, which is all white? Or is it possibly being advertised at a historically Black college or university? How are you letting organizations know that you're a welcoming environment for a variety of ethnic groups? And who's doing the interviewing? Are they bringing their biases to this? How about your employees? Do they create a welcoming environment for people of different ethnic backgrounds, different racial backgrounds? Do people welcome and accept the different points of view? Are the employees Do the employees know that you have a diversity plan? Are they accepting of it? Again, these are all questions that you want to ask when you're trying to assess your organization. Does your organization have a discrimination policy? And is it well advertised? Do your employees know how to make a complaint? And these are just more on top of it. Pay and reward policies. Are they transparent and equitable? One of the comments I've heard recently is, depending on either your racial or gender background, in some cases, they look for potential. In other cases, especially where there's bias involved, they look at what have you accomplished. So it's setting an unfair bar for individuals applying for positions. When somebody leaves the company, is their diversity tracked? And is there follow-up questions as to why the people are leaving? What kind of training is being done for the employees? Is it part of, excuse me, is it part of each new employees in training? Do all the employees receive it? Are managers trained on how to support diversity? And when people are part of the interviewing process, are they given training to make sure that when they interview, they present a bias-free perception? For a nonprofit organization, does it work with local community groups? Does it understand the local community? Are they looking to find solutions? Oh, we're going to fix this, and they go and attack one specific area, and it doesn't help the community at all. So they need to get that feedback from the local community. The local community needs to be partners with the nonprofits so that they can bring forward their feedback, their issues, etc. I know with one organization that I belong to, they scheduled a major event. And I said, wait a second, you know, that's Yom Kippur. And they're going, oh. They thought they had recognized it, but they hadn't. Unfortunately, they looked at an online calendar and made the assumption, because it said it started Sunday night, that that was when the holiday was. And they didn't recognize that it started Sunday night, but went all the way through Monday. So I ended up missing a day of the conference. And these are just additional tools available for you, and you can create your own assessment tool. And these are just references. So let's take a look at our board. What are the skills? What are the demographics of each individual? What does the board need? One of the boards I sit on is now talking about, well, we don't have an attorney. Or I know for my own board, I'm trying to get more women on it and more people of color, just so that we can start to get different perspectives. So you want to ask what's missing, and then you want to develop a plan to address those weaknesses. So again, we're looking at this diverse background. When you're talking to somebody, make sure they understand that we're looking for a diverse population. We want diversity. We want to be able to go forward with different perspectives. And one of the other issues that comes up a lot is fundraising. So I know this is about diversity, but that's one of the expectations for boards. Is somebody comfortable with the key issues facing the organization? We said earlier that a very large percentage of the board is white. So how do we change that? We may want to use a search firm or contact chapters of local professional societies. We hear a lot now about the African American Chamber of Commerce of New Jersey. Reach out to them. Or Jenny is involved with the Asian Civic Organization. Try and reach out to these different community groups and see if there's somebody there who would be interested in joining your board and has the skills that you need. Ask your staff and volunteers. But you want to bring that diversity on the board if you can help it. And the same type of questions apply to your staff and your volunteers. Look at your leadership, look at your staff, look at your volunteers. How diverse is each one? What's the skills and knowledges that they have? When you have openings, how do you go about letting people know that these are available? And you make an effort to let the underrepresented staff members or volunteers have an opportunity to fill these holes. And then you want to look at the weaknesses and develop plans to help bring these underrepresented employees to higher levels. You want to put together a diversity team. And it's not just the people up in the C-suite. You want all levels of people. You also want your clients and stakeholders, because your perception versus your clients and stakeholders' perceptions are different. So how do we get started? We've assessed our organization. We said, wait a second. We know we have a problem. We don't have diversity. We don't have inclusion. So where do we start? We set the ground rules. We start with the basics. Defining, just like we did, what's diversity, what's equity, what's inclusion, why is it important? Then look at the assessment, see what it's telling us. And then, excuse me, then we want to start breaking down the issues and developing strategies to help our organization become more diverse. When we start at the top level, and then we drill down. Things that should be obvious to us is management all older white males? Who's in the clerical positions? Are they primarily female? What's the status of the minority groups throughout the organization? Are they primarily in lower level positions, or are they at mid levels? If they are in the lower levels and the mid levels, but none in the senior level, ask the question why, and start drilling down and asking those questions. Also see what the employees are saying on culture. And this is just one part of it. If you're not getting good answers or not getting any answers, then you may want to go back and have some employee focus groups to find out. I know I was dealing with a nonprofit, and they did a survey, and it wasn't diversity, but they found that nobody in their billing department responded to the survey. And when they went back and talked to the people in the billing department in the administrative area, they found out that that group didn't really feel that they were part of the organization, because all the focus was on the frontline workers, and it was a medical group. So no answer is an answer in itself, and you may want to go back and, like I said, have focus group to find out why people don't feel connected to what the organization is doing and what it's trying to do in the area of diversity. So the next thing is put together a plan. First thing you should be doing is looking at your policies and procedures. Do they support diversity? Look at your bylaws. Get management's buy-in. Again, without their buy-in, all your efforts are going to fail. If you remember the phrase flavor of the month, flavor of the week, flavor of the day, if management doesn't walk the talk and they don't constantly espouse the goals, then any efforts are going to fail. Make it part of your strategic plan, that people know that it's embedded in how the organization is going forward. Develop SMART goals. SMART goals: specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time constrained. For creating a diverse organization. And you're going to work towards changing that organization culture. You do that by recruiting, selecting, and making sure your hiring processes are all transparent and unbiased. You want to make sure your compensation is fair and equitable. And then you want to get diversity committees with representatives from all levels and groupings and provide them with access to senior management. So often, an organization will create these diversity committees, but they don't have access to senior management. So it's just for show. And the employees know this very quickly. Your policies and procedures. You want to make sure that an organization has an organization-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. I don't think I mentioned this to the group. This was a conversation we're having in the middle during the break. I belong to another nationwide organization, and I raised the issue about diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether or not they're putting together a committee to address it. And the answer was, well, we're going to let our local chapters handle it, and then we'll see what comes out of it. Well, I think you can guess what's going to happen with the local chapters. Some will do it, some won't. But unless the top level says, wait a second, this is something we're going to do. We want to be inclusive. We want to have diversity. And unless the senior levels have it, it's not going to happen. You want to build diversity into your bylaws. Zero tolerance for discrimination. And then you want to look at the rest of your policies and procedures to make sure that they do include diversity and inclusion and equity. So, our bylaws, you want to have a purpose statement. You want to have rules for the selection and qualification of board members, looking at everything throughout. And then you're going to set up inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion audits. Now, one thing, again, and I'm not an attorney, but usually if you're changing your bylaws, it has to be reported to the proper authority. Is diversity and equity and inclusion as part of your organizational goals? What role does it play in your vision or mission? One thing that's recently happened is there's been a number of environmental groups, and they were challenged with regards to what's the importance of diversity to your organization. And we've heard, and one thing that came about in Camden recently was they were talking about a new power plant there. Well, many underrepresented, underprivileged people live near these type of factories, these types of power plants, and they're finding that there's problems with their health because of where they're living. So The environmental groups are starting to recognize that they need to build into their vision and mission that it's not just making sure that there's clean water, but there's clean water in these areas where there are underrepresented or underprivileged people. And these are just questions you want to keep in mind when you're developing your organizational goals. Can it advance the organization's mission? How will the programs and the people you serve benefit if your organization embraces diversity, equity, and inclusion? What will it do to your fundraising? If you become more diverse and inclusive, how would it change your operations? And then you want to develop a plan around that. For senior management, and you've heard me say it multiple times, without senior management's buy-in, you're not going to have the organization change. So your leadership, you want them to be able to be out front, where they're committed to it, where they're willing to take a challenge, willing to break the barriers. They've got to be aware of their own biases. They've got to be sensitive to other cultures. And they've got to be willing to work to change the structure of the organization, of how resources are allocated, the language they use. They have to be the role models for changing this organization. And without that, you're not going to be able to progress and become a diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization. Just some other parts to it. Accountability. People have to be held accountable for actions and for having goals. And you have to report it. Make it visible. The more you make things visible, the more it will get done. And then, as was said earlier, want to have diversity and inclusion committees and have them help formulate and track and achieve the key objectives. Even though it's got to come from the top, the people have to buy into it. You want to make sure there's no stereotyping. One of the issues may be dress. If somebody has a different ethnic background where they need certain days off or other requirements in order to be able to do their work, you need to consider that. You want to have people questioning how they look at things, to look for those subconscious biases. Learn how to listen and appreciate diverse perspectives. I know one of the things that happened with me was I was doing some teaching and somebody I knew made a comment and just didn't sound like it lined up with what I was trying to address at that moment. I kind of said, yeah, okay, that's good, and moved on. While the individual came up to me later and said, you know, you missed the point of what I was saying. And he was absolutely right. But the thing is, you need to be able to listen and appreciate what different people are saying and understand where their perspectives are. Another key point, each person is individual. They bring their experiences, they bring their background, and they all have merit. And then give employees opportunities to grow. One last part, culture change is not easy. It takes 3 to 5 years, and it's an ongoing process. How are you doing your recruiting? Do you tell people you're an equal opportunity employer? If not, why not? In fact, I know a couple of people who haven't applied for jobs because that verbiage wasn't there. How can you find other potential employees? Where can you seek them out rather than your own personal circles? Are we asking the organization to help identify minority candidates? You may have employees who could do the work if given the opportunity. And then, as was said earlier, look to different organizations. There's a New Jersey Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. There's an African American Chamber of Commerce. Reach out to the faith communities. All these are ways to help your organization become more diverse. Think about advertising in locations you may never have had thought of before. Don't always depend on the professional recruiters or the ads in certain newspapers or just specific social medias. Try going to places where you're looking for the candidates rather than just making an assumption that they will come to you. Some of the other things in there, watch your language. You may be using stereotypical masculine terms or other terms that could be off-putting. One of the things that we've found is that when we remove the names and other identifying cultural indicators from job applications, that many minority applicants were graded much better, and it's the same group, than they were when the names of the individuals are there. And it just indicated another source of bias where people weren't even aware of it. And I think they've recently done something with music applicants where they didn't show the applicants to the board inviting new students and they just let them play in a blanked off room and had the admissions committee just listen. And it changed the perspective of the individuals who were brought into the music schools. Come back down to the bottom one. Don't let the stereotypes hinder seeing the value of individuals. How many times have we heard, well, that person's just a young pup, for lack of a better word, and you dismiss their ideas? Well, what was it? There's a 14-year-old girl who may have found part of a cure for the coronavirus. You can get your ideas from people of all groups and all ages, of all ethnicities, etc. It's not enough to get the people in the door. You've got to create a path forward for them. Provide them with the appropriate training to make it equitable for them. Get them into leadership training programs. Create mentorship and sponsorship. Mentorship, everybody knows that word, where you assign a senior person to work with the individual. Sponsorship is where somebody becomes an advocate for the minority employees, who stands there and says, wait a second, this is a job opening. This person is a good person for it. So it's a dual path. You have one individual who is helping them grow and understand the organization. You have another who's out there saying, this is a good person, tooting the horn for that individual. One of the things that, how many times have you heard where an individual, everybody meets out at the golf course, and that's where they network and so much business gets done? Well, guess what? There may be a golf course where the individual doesn't feel welcome. I know when I was growing up in upstate New York, there was a golf club that very specifically said no Jews allowed. Create the opportunities for minorities to meet and gain exposure to a wider range of the organization. Look for potential. Look ahead, say, here's a good individual. Can we give them an opportunity to try? And for the minorities, provide them with a mentor and a sponsor. And again, promote women and minorities to high-level positions. For human resources, make sure you've got the policies and procedures there. Make sure people understand it's not about a number, it's not about tokenism, but where everybody's voice is heard. Let people be themselves. Let them bring their value to the organization. Make sure pay and rewards policies are transparent, fair, and equitable. And make sure you have in place a policy and procedures handling complaints and harassment and discrimination. More of the same about training and retraining, forming diversity councils, making sure that you give the underrepresented groups the necessary support. Make sure people feel that they can raise their concerns, set benchmarks, and again, make them visible so people know how they're doing. To implement the program, you've got to commit to action, create the committees and make sure that there's clear objectives, set your goals, make sure people understand that they are responsible for delivering results. Make it visible, create that accountability, and have regular reports. Just don't say you have to do it and then forget about it. Make sure that people are actually doing the work. And then continuously monitor things as you go forward. You know, one of the best ways to make sure something happens is by telling people you're going to do it. So with that, again, you want management there engaged with the staff, talking continuously about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Make sure your messaging is there for different stakeholders so that they know what you're doing. Training, make sure people are trained and understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion is about. Let everybody know how you're doing and what the positive impact is of that, your diversity efforts. And then don't just do it one way. You have social media, you have memos, you got all sorts of ways, but let people know what you're doing and how well you're doing. And then lastly, you have to keep at it. You can't just do it once and done. So you're going to continually audit your organization, look to see how you're doing, get the feedback from your employees, from your donors, and make sure that you've got benchmarks and goals out there. And if necessary, revise how you're doing. But always make sure that people are aware of what you're doing and continually monitor to make sure that you are succeeding, and if not, change it, but keep your focus on it. Some of the common pitfalls that are tied to a diversity effort. You've got your quota. Yay, we succeeded. Well, guess what? Everybody forgets about it then. And you really haven't addressed the real reasons why you got into this situation in the first place. Or you bring in a consultant and they do all the work, and that consultant walks out the door and you're back to where you're beginning. People feel, oh, it's the flavor of the week. Stick their head in the ground, and a week later, it's the next flavor of the week. Or you don't do anything further and people get discouraged and don't want to support it. People really don't want to talk about diversity, don't want to talk about the issues. And until those hard conversations are started, things will stay the same. So often what happens is, oh yeah, we're going to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion effort. And we find one minority staff member and they become responsible for it. And they're expected to do all the work. And it's not an organizational wide type of effort. And if that minority staff member leaves, the whole thing collapses. Or they don't give the individual authority, they don't give them access to senior management, and they don't give them the resources. So it's just a non-starter at that point. And the other thing is, well, people say, oh, we did this and that's it, without recognizing that it's got to be a long-term effort. To succeed and continue to succeed, you've got to build it, diversity, equity, inclusion throughout. Is it in your vision and mission and core values? If it isn't, is it going to be sustainable? You want to continue to reinforce the messaging about diversity, making sure that you respect and are sensitive to other people's needs. You want to make sure that the talent is out there and that you're recruiting your talent from the diverse groups. You don't want to put in place barriers where you say this job requires this when you know groups of people don't have those skills or talents and aren't needed. Again, getting your employee diversity groups in place and monitoring, are you meeting your diversity goals? It's 5 after 8. Let me get everybody's opinion. I have 2 more slides to this section, and I want to kick us into the panel discussion. Are you okay if we skip a break and just keep rolling? What's everybody think? Yes, no, nod your head. Okay, I'm getting a thumbs up. All right, we'll keep rolling. Thank you. All right. Believe it or not, there's at least 70,000 foundations in the United States. And foundations set the tone for nonprofits because the foundations provide the money for much of what the nonprofits do. So in order for foundations to help with diversity, equity, and inclusion, they've got to look at their own biases. They've got to make sure diversity is part of their thinking and their viewpoint. They've got to admit to the fact that, wait a second, we're going to influence how the local nonprofits do. And they've got to help push the idea with their nonprofit partners that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. And they should be meeting with their nonprofits and others to discuss how diversity, equity, and inclusion is needed as part of the discussions to collaboratively address structural issues that limit minorities' access to opportunities. So that's first part. With regards to the facilitators, no 2 communities are alike. So the foundations have to understand that and have to understand that the local nonprofits will bring different perspectives and have to deal with it in different ways. It's not a cookie cutter approach. They've got to, the foundations have to act as, or excuse me, have diversity, equity, and inclusion as a key part of their values, mission, and activities. Things we've said. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are the bedrock for going forward. You have to look for structural issues, opportunities for people in underserved communities, and help them build the capacity of those nonprofit organizations. It's not just about doing a specific program, it's building the nonprofit and the community to address these issues. So it's not just giving programmatic dollars. You have to look at who you're partnering with. Are the nonprofits that the foundations are supporting, do they reflect the foundation's diversity, equity, and inclusion values? And you want to build those long-term relationships to jointly solve the problems. And a key part of that is the community involved? Is the community on board with what they're trying to do? I jumped ahead a little bit, but it's, again, engaging with the community. What's kind of diversity is within the community? And you want to get the stakeholders involved. Again, you're looking at the structural issues. What is it in the community that is holding back the minorities from being successful? And then evaluation tools have many times been used to beat nonprofits over the head for not getting something accomplished, rather than using it as just a scale as to whether somebody succeeded or not. Use it as a learning tool to see whether or not there are issues that the foundation could help, or what was done right, what can be shared with other partners, all in helping to implement their process and practice of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, last slide, and then I think I'm going to stop talking. Some additional thoughts and best practices. Have an inclusion minute at the start of each day. Encourage people to raise different perspectives. You never know what people think until you ask them. Provide mentors and sponsors for your minority employees. Reach out to someone to mentor you. Develop communication skills for the minority members so that they can express their positions. Be intentional in offering training opportunities to minority members. Make sure they're involved. Get them into classes that'll help them to grow. And then set up your diversity groups and make sure they have direct access to leadership. And I'm done talking. Questions? All right. Now, we've assembled a group of great people, and let me introduce you to them. I introduced them at the beginning. And we're going to ask them, hopefully, some very insightful questions where they can give us their perspectives. First, we've got Leslie Fair. Leslie is the head of Inclusion Strategies. She's a truth-seeking inclusion and intersectionality-driven resource wellness and promoting humanitarian activists. She served with the UN for over 15 years, and she's been included with residencies in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Republic of Kenya, as well as experiencing managing and delivering learning, development, and resilience programs to humanitarian development personnel in over 140 countries around the globe, including international NGOs. Leslie, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
We also have with us Ricardo, are you here now?
I'm here, but somehow my name turns out as being Sean.
That's what threw me off. So we've got Ricardo Camacho, who's the executive director of the Puerto Rican Unity for Progress. and it's responsible for the overall administration of the organization, which was founded in 1976 as a nonprofit that promotes improved access to economic, social, and cultural opportunities and resources to individuals and their families, with special emphasis on the Hispanic community through the services and advocacy programs offered. And he's got over 25 years of administrative knowledge working in higher education and over 7 years working as an assistant dean and executive director for the Division of School and Community Academic Programs at Camden County College. We have Asham and it's Shafi.
Yeah, Asim Shafi.
Thank you. He's the sales executive for SAP, and if you're not familiar with SAP, it's a global software company. He's a married father of 3, lives in Cherry Hill. He's been actively involved in local community as well as mosques. He is part of the Islamic Center of South Jersey, where he's the General Secretary of the Palmyra Mosque. He's also a Sunday teacher and part of the administrative staff for the Sunday school. He also has served as the treasurer of the Muslim American Community Association in Voorhees. And he's also an active member of Jewish, Christian, Muslim Tri-Faith Dialogue, plays golf and woodworking. And he's also been recognized. He is an alumni of the Leadership of Philadelphia class 2016, and he was the recipient of the Martin Luther King Freedom Medal, awarded by Camden County Freeholders for volunteering work with their Diversity Commission in 2011. And let me get Jenny's information here, so bear with me. Jenny Yuen is an associate professor, College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity for the University of Albany, State University of Albany of New York. She's worked in the field of human information behavior and human-computer interaction since 2000. She has researched how different populations, including general users and older adults, seek information with information systems during the pandemic. She received a SUNY seed grant to investigate how older adults responded to COVID-19. Meanwhile, she's been investigating how socially vulnerable populations adopt technologies during the pandemic. She is currently organizing a workshop on supporting and engaging diverse and socially vulnerable populations with technology adoption amid COVID for iConference 2021. She's also an executive board member of the Cherry Hill, okay, help me out, Hosea Chinese School in Cherry Hill. And she's going to be discussing socially vulnerable populations and their technology adoption. Jenny, did I pronounce that correctly, or how far off was I?
Yeah, correct. Huaxia.
Asha. Okay, and I probably still mispronounced it. With that, I have some pre-prepared questions that I'll ask them, and then we'll open up the floor to the rest of the class to ask any questions that you may have. So with that being said, and I'll let the 4 of you fight over who gets to go first. What do you feel is the biggest issue facing nonprofits with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion? So Leslie, Jenny, Asim, and Ricardo, who wants to go first?
Ladies first.
I'll go first, that's fine.
Good,
Basically,
good.
I think it's always with the premise that we always tend to put the organization first. And I think what the need is that we need to sometime think about the people, the community that we're serving. And we have to, as an organization, change in order to meet the needs of the community as a whole. It's a changing community, so we need to change with the organization has to change with the community. I mean, that's the way I look at it. The biggest problem is that sometimes we find ourselves as being homogeneous. You know, we're set in our ways, but we have to be able to be transformational in order for us to meet the needs of the community that we're serving.
Okay. Who would like to go next? Leslie or Jenny?
I'll go next. Yeah.
Floor is yours.
I think the biggest issue facing nonprofits with the recognition of lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we need to take, how can they take concrete action to address this DEL? Transparency could be a big challenge facing here, and how can we make sure many things are transparent, and also Ira mentioned about communications. We need to focus, and what are the things that we need to address, and what are the things issues that we need to address. So yeah, these are my opinion.
Sid, you look like you're about ready, and I know less.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay.
You break up a little bit, but we heard you for most of it.
Okay.
Right. Leslie?
Sure. I just would agree with the other panelists. The issue of communication is so important, as well as looking at the community you serve. One of the observations that I always make as well is that there's no accountability. Donors don't demand accountability on inclusion issues, so oftentimes NGOs aren't really incentivized. The question is, what is the consequence of not having an inclusive environment or an inclusive staff? I think that donors could really incentivize NGOs to be more responsive in that respect.
And I know, especially with donors, and I'll jump in for a second, they tend to forget that the organization has to exist if they're to deliver the programs, but their focus is primarily on the programs and not the organization. So, same, you're up.
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, I think that the challenge right now is that the definition of some of these things is just shifting, right? You know, the people themselves are starting to kind of get this understanding of what exactly is diversity, what exactly does it even mean. So not knowing that and sort of getting a common understanding of that I think is the biggest issue, because, you know, identification of a problem is the main starting point for anything. And I think that since this issue has, you know, let's just take America, for example. America has been grappling with this issue for a while, and only in the last maybe 20 to 30 years that we've made some really, you know, conversational progress in this. And so, and then this last 4 years have brought this whole issue very much in the forefront. And so now people are even talking more, and the more people talk, the better they're able to actually identify the problem and get the proper vocabulary for it to be able to describe it. Because sometimes, I mean, you know, I came to the United States in 1987. I was just happy to be here. But my kids, for example, who are born here, they don't have the same outlook they do identify with a lot of things that you were talking about, like cultural appropriation, for example. They have a lot more of a reaction to that than I ever did. So I think this evolving definitions of these things is also the biggest challenge right now.
And as you said, and I've heard from all of you, is the identification of it, people being willing to accept, hey, there is an issue, and starting to talk about it. So our next question, what diversity issues or obstacles have you personally faced with your work experience and career progression with nonprofits? And have you been limited in participating fully in work processes that are not experienced by all your other colleagues? So who would like to go first? Don't make me pick on one of you.
So I can go first. It's no problem. I can talk about, I've had the privilege of working on two nonprofits, but both for religious organizations. We've just formed another organization called the Muslim Federation of South Jersey, modeled after the Jewish Federation. And that's a non-sort of religious organization, and the idea being more social. And what I can tell you is that trying to get the Muslim community, which is very diverse, out of their mosques into and working with others and trying to even enlist board members from different diversities is a challenge, because as a immigrant organizations or immigrant community, they're busy with their religious sort of leanings, and it's difficult to get them out of there and to focus on a diverse organization right now. So I just find that they're distracted right now in other things that are that are higher priorities for them than to work on something that is more social. That's what's been my experience. I have a very limited experience in this, not like some of my esteemed panel members.
Leslie, how about you going next? You're on mute.
Sorry, yeah. I'm taking notes, so I don't want to clank over anyone's voice. So yeah, I thought about that question a lot, and I just want to make a comment about the emotionality that I have and commenting on those kinds of things, because in the United States we have a culture where there's a lot of diminishment of struggle. There's a lot of historical erasure. And there are environments in which people don't really want to hear about your personal problems, all these micro invalidations that you talk so eloquently about, Ira. So I was reflecting on my response to that and within that context, because people generally have, throughout my life, I'm a woman of a particular age, and there's always been this devaluing. Yeah, not today, and diminishing. So with that context, I'd like to say that probably having worked and lived abroad, I lived in Saudi Arabia for a few years. I lived in Nairobi for a few years. One of the things that I quickly became aware of is that America's brand of bias expands beyond our own shores. And a lot of expectations and commentary that I received as a Black woman traveling related to the prejudices that actually emerged in the US. So one thing, the Alien in Your Own Land is one of the examples that Dr. Sue, Dr. Darrell Sue from Columbia University, whom you used, it was a great example, Ira, talks about that. And I'll just talk about that one example. So this perception of what is an American, and I look at the panelists of color, and I'm sure that perhaps they've had the same experience. People could never believe when I was traveling that I was American. So they would ask me, well, where are your parents from? And I would explain to them that I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and they would ask me, well, where were my parents from? And I would say, well, they're from Ohio as well. And they would ask me, well, where are their parents from? And I would say, well, my grandfather's also from Ohio, and I just go on and on and on. And then sometimes I would ask people, what are you really asking? And people would tell me that, one, they didn't perceive me as a real American, right? And I would ask them what they meant by that, and they would say, well, you're not white. And I would say that, obviously the obvious is that Native Americans are the ones who were indigenous to this continent and to this country. And I would ask them, why is it that they wouldn't perceive me? I had a good friend who was first generation Italian American, whom they would always easily identify as an American, but my parents have been here, my family has been here since the 18th century. So I would always find it interesting that I was the one, we would laugh about it, I was the one who had been here for 7 years, seven generations, and Susan had been there for one. And the presumption was that Americans looked a certain way. And they would always insist that I had such a thick accent that wasn't an American accent. And they would tell me, oh, we thought you were from Jamaica because you sound like a Jamaican, or we thought you were from some other part of Africa because you have such a heavy African accent. And the last thing I'll say about that micro-invalidation is that I was attending an event, a US Embassy event, when I was in Zimbabwe on one occasion, sat down with the group, and we were having a good time talking and so forth. And the gentleman beside me said, you are such a wonderful guest. I just love your country. And this happened to be an American man who was from Ohio. So he worked for the US Embassy in Zimbabwe. And I asked him, well, where are you from? He's like, I'm from Columbus or someplace, I don't remember. I said, well, I'm a Buckeye, just like you. I'm not from Zimbabwe. And he says, oh my gosh, you look just like a Zimbabwean. You sound just like a Zimbabwean. So I give that example to demonstrate how, there's that adage that sometimes people say that they don't see color, which is another kind of micro-invalidation, by the way. But I use it as an example just to demonstrate that even with my own compatriots when I'm traveling, my identity becomes very nebulous. People can't figure out where I am and who I am. And that has to do with this notion of who is a real American. So I would say that that's probably the most prevalent, because I traveled around a lot to different countries delivering training. And that was always the first thing that people would ask. There was this real curiosity about where my roots came from, among Black Africans as well, who would often tell me, well, you're clearly from Africa. And I would say to them, well, you didn't, I mean, clearly my race is that I'm a Black person. You asked me what my nationality was. And they would sometimes be perplexed. They would say, well, why are you calling yourself an American? You're an African. So I offer that as an example. Perhaps that's the most pervasive and persistent type of micro-invalidation that I've received personally in my professional work.
Jenny, you want to go next? Thank you, Leslie. You're on mute, Jenny.
I'll go next.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Ricardo.
that's fine. I'll go next. I mean, you know why? Because I want to tail into what Leslie was saying, because I agree with her totally on that one. What she was saying is that when you leave the United States and you visit another country, they assume a certain portrayal of what the American person looks like. And I've gotten the same type of reaction. Oh, where's your family from? I mean, even though my family's from Puerto Rico, oh, so you're Puerto Rican, you're not American. But yes, we are American. You know, we were born in America. We're from here, you know. But she's absolutely right. Leslie, you're right on that. You hit the nail on the head, because when we travel, they have this misconception of what an American is supposed to look like, you know, and it's true. I mean, we deal with this all the time, you know, especially because we look different, you know, because of the color of our skin, or maybe the way we talk, a little difference in the way we talk and our little accents and stuff like that. But you're right, it's true. When we visit us abroad, we feel that. The other thing I just wanted to mention, and I think many of us feel this, that when we're in some sort of like a board meeting, or we're in some sort of a committee meeting, huh?
You froze.
And I just wanted to, okay, do you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, the only thing I wanted to mention also, sometimes we kind of feel ourselves alienated as well, because we might be the only person of a different color or a different ethnicity in that room. You know, we kind of stand out. And then when they look at you, it's like, what is he going to say? Or what is she going to say? So those are the kind of things we got to look at as well. You know, that's my perspective on it.
Jenny, your turn now. Thank you. Very.
Thank you, Ara. My I have been in Albany for I think for about 14 years. My office neighbor is African American, and I also have colleagues from Indian. Where else? Some other countries. Oh, Korean, and so if I spend time thinking about if there's anything missing in related to diversity. I think so far, in terms of diversity, inclusiveness, I would say it's a very good environment. But I also, Leslie reminded me of an interesting story. I won't claim it. Kind of very interesting story related to culture. So when we moved to Cherry Hill, New Jersey, about 10 years ago, and my friend recommended me to a dentist who is very professional, very nice, and very patient. And we love the office, we love the dentists. And one day I got a phone call from the front desk, and the lady asked me, "Can you make sure?" Because I said, "Why?" They said, "Because her last name is different from yours." So, then I provided all my proof, and then they started
Jenny, you're freezing
processing
a
the
little bit.
insurance redemption process, whatever. Hello?
Yeah, okay.
So
You're
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So did you hear the story?
We missed the key part, which was what the receptionist asked you.
Oh, she asked me, can you provide proof that you are your daughter's biological mom? I said, why? They said, because your daughter's last name is different from yours. Then I provided the proof. And also I told them, I said, in China, after you get married, you keep your own last name. So they learned it. So I don't think it's anything to do with discrimination, but I think it is a very interesting story related to culture. So that's what Ira did to organize the panel and organize this workshop, so we can get more people to understand each other, and we can expose our own culture, our own perspectives to other people, can unite in a way that we expect. So thank you.
And let me share a personal story. Is everybody aware of who the Tuskegee Airmen are?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. I am a member of the Tuskegee Airmen.
Oh, really?
I was a member of the Philadelphia chapter, and I was one of the first non-African American members. And there was a high level of resentment against me because I wasn't African American. We also had an occasion where there was an award being given to the group on the battleship New Jersey, the Poor Chaplains Award. And I was wearing the blazer and my name tag, etc. I had an older white woman very nonchalantly come over to me and asked, "Are you an original?" And there was just the expectation that I would be African American. But the other part, as I said, was the biases cut both ways. Some groups can be very insular and not willing to accept somebody from the outside coming in also. All right. Moving on. What do you feel would be just one thing that nonprofits could do to improve diversity and inclusion in their nonprofits? And Jenny, we've had you go last a couple times, so why don't you go first this time?
Sorry, Ira, what is the question? What do you feel would be just one thing, right?
That a nonprofit
Hello?
could do, yep, to improve
Yeah.
their diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you. I think one thing we can do is that have a diversity officer who is in charge. And in addition to us appointing, in addition to appoint such a diversity officer, we make sure we provide enough resources and power for him to do whatever needed and whatever appropriate to apply the concept and identity of diversity, equity, and inclusion to the nonprofits. And this diversity officer can, I think Ira mentioned this too, because I have my answer. Then when I watch through the whole video and all the lecture, I think some things we have the similar idea. So I think one other thing that nonprofits can do is they can have to directly report to the board, to the higher class in the nonprofit. So in that way, you can build up a direct communication. So he can. It's also one way that can give this officer the sense of inclusiveness, so he can communicate with the top managers and top higher class of the organization directly. And also he can network with other colleagues and try to communicate and try to deliver the concept and deliver whatever ideas he has to create more diverse and inclusive environment. Yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you, Jen. Leslie, do you want to go next?
Sure. Forgive me, I was just listening to Jenny with a lot of interest and not wanting to repeat what she said. So yeah, what I was thinking about as you were talking and presenting that really informative information, Ira, was the fact that Starbucks, I don't know if any of the listeners or panel members have seen in the press that in October, Starbucks announced that they would link their executive pay to their diversity goals. I thought that was really innovative and quite effective. So for senior leadership, C-suite, and executive leadership, linking your pay to the achievement of diversity metrics, I thought was a really powerful and innovative intervention that Starbucks is initiating.
That's a great thought.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Hassan, you want to go next? Or Leslie, do you have any other thoughts? Or
No, that's all for me. Thank you.
You're on mute.
Yeah, I think that the idea of linking the pocketbook to one of the MBOs to that would be a phenomenal thing to do. The challenge always becomes, how do you measure that, right? And then there is that's all I'll say, is because all of these things are related to, like, how are you going to measure it, right? Because they could do that, but I'll be interested to find out as to how they're going to be measuring it, right? Because in some shape or form, the organizations or the corporations have started to recognize that that it is meaningful for them to hire people that represent the clients that they're serving. And that's, once again, it's not necessarily an egalitarian notion. It's just that it makes better business sense. So that's an important aspect to realize that once again, it's not, it's anyways, that's what I think.
Ricardo, how about you?
Well, I mean, I agree with the other panelists as well, but I think it's also important that simple word is acceptance. Being able to accept your community, accept the people that you're serving, you know, and it's also with that, you're including that. You have to have it within, you even said it in your own PowerPoint presentation, include it in your bylaws, you know, having training, you know, in your handbook. Those things that need to be brought to the agenda and make sure they're instilled in the organization itself, you know, having this diversity within the organization to make sure that people are accepted for who they are, not just for the clients, but also for the employees.
And that's a key point.
Okay, we have to look at them as well.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Each person brings their own perspective.
They do.
And it's amazing when you sit and listen and actually hear what they're saying. Sometimes it's just a complete awakening for you. So I have one more question I'm going to ask the group, and then I'm going to open it up to everybody else to ask questions. We've seen a lot of talk of late, a lot of protests, a lot of discussions around things like Black Lives Matter and other minority equity movements. What impact do you feel that has had on the nonprofits? Ricardo, why don't you go first this time?
With that one?
Yeah, that's the hard one.
When I look at that, when it comes to Black Lives Matters, I don't think people really know what that means. I mean, in reality, it's not that Black lives, but we all matter, but it's that people of color, which are kind of looked at differently, okay? And it's also for us to be treated equally, you know, all of us, you know? And that's the issue, that's what Black Lives Matters is all about. It's part of being inclusion. You know, we all need to be treated equally. And because of our skin color or because of our ethnicity, we are treated differently because of the color of our skin. And that's what needs to be recognized. You know, I look at it like it's not just that we're talking about that one group is more important than the other. No, we're talking about that we all need to be treated equally. And that's the importance of it. You know what I mean? And that's the way I look at that perspective from it. Okay. And I think there's a misconception that they say, well, if there, you know, there's a misconception because if everyone was treated equally, there wouldn't have been a Black Lives Matters. And we need Black Lives Matters because of that, because we have to recognize our diversity as individuals and also an acceptance of who we are.
Thank you. Sim, you want to go next?
I'll go next because I think I'm gonna bring a different perspective. I'm raising 3 kids here, right? And my oldest daughter is a psychology graduate. And one of the things that Black Lives Matter has done for, at least for me, is that it has informed me with the struggle of the African American or the Black community here in America. And the struggle that they continue to have and they continue to be marginalized is so much more acute than other minorities. That's what I have understood. Because of the stigma associated with slavery, because of the horrible things that were done, that is so much more acute and so much more impactful than people of color, because the people of color have come here on their own volition, looking for a better life, and they have found it. The promise of America has given them that. Whereas the Black community suffers from, intergenerational problems because of what happened to them. So I think that house is so much more on fire, and we need to take the fire extinguisher there more, because the other houses are not on fire as much, or at least they're not. So that's my perspective, or at least that's what I've understood. The other thing that I have benefit from is all of the different gray areas and all of the education that has happened, with more vocabulary being introduced to be able to express all of the different diversity now. So I will just say those two things, and I'm thankful that I have learned this, because it actually, I think the more I've learned, the more empathy I'm getting. So.
Thank you. Jenny, you want to go next?
I think this movement and other movements related to minority let more voice out, and they give people, including me, an opportunity to look at ways to how we can address the issue and how we can promote equity. And I really appreciate all the videos. One video you just played, the one with labeling as different starting lines, equity related. I think I have seen that many times, but every time when I watch it, I still feel tears in my eyes. So I think this kind of movement and these are ways that for equity, and make more people be aware of the situation of the global situation, and also the diversity, equity, and inclusion issues that need more and more attention. This is my opinion.
Leslie?
Yeah, I think I was listening with a lot of interest to both Jenny's and Asim's comments. I love the fact that you're getting such a great education from your children. I think, Asim, that intergenerational knowledge is exactly what inclusion is, right? They are younger. You know, I have 3 millennial adults in my life, children, and the capacity that they build in our lives really illustrates what happens when we have a diverse environment, and in your case, is age. I was thinking that this whole discussion about slavery is always very compelling. I was in a bus one time with some of my UN colleagues, sitting behind this guy from Finland, and he says, "I am so sick of Black Americans using slavery as an excuse. You know, I had nothing to do with that, you know." And you know, we hear that refrain often, and one of the things that I always give people an example of, I mean, I'm not an old lady. I was born in 1960, but my children are the first generation of African-American kids to be born in this country with civil rights. I always give that example. My kids they were born in the 80s. I didn't have the right to vote. I didn't have a right to equal education. You know, the Civil Rights Amendment hadn't been passed. So really, this is a new phenomenon, and the vestiges of slavery are very recent and continue to be. We all know about systemic issues like redlining and a lot of things that we've read about that are very relevant.
Voter suppression that's happened.
Yes, absolutely.
It's happening now.
Absolutely. So this whole lack of understanding about the vestiges. My husband was the first graduate in his class in 1976 from an integrated high school in his town. So we are these. I was looking today that Ruby Bridges' mother just passed away. We know Ruby Bridges, who is
Yeah,
the
she's
famous
alive.
Norman
Yeah,
Rockwell painter.
exactly.
Her mom passed away today. But you're right, exactly. So we're all living around here. One other example that I always found compelling is that our former Attorney General, Barack Obama's Attorney General, his wife's sister was one of the students who integrated the schools in Arkansas. I mean, and here he is, the Attorney General of the United States. So what's compelling for me and what is really exciting, and this is why I left the UN and wanted to be a part of this discussion in my own country, is the fact that America has not been receptive to these discussions. I mean, these are the kind of discussions that historically marginalized groups like Latinx or Latina and Latino cultures, or LGBTQ plus cultures, or Jewish cultures. We've all talked in our own space, but we know that we've been up against a lot of resistance when we try to present these discussions in a public forum. And it's been aggressive. There have been micro invalidations, and like the gentleman in the bus with me, that was a microaggression for sure. Certainly you could even consider it a micro assault, because he was diminishing and erasing my historical, personal, and emotional experiences as a person of color. So I'm very excited that I have the opportunity to travel around the world, because what I see in every country that I've traveled to, I've been to 60 or so, and I've lived in them, and several. And what I observe often is that the experiences, this whole notion of implicit biases or unconscious biases is prevalent. And the reason there's a United Nations is because we're in 16 peacekeeping missions right now. It's because there's war and insurrection in 16 countries right now. So it's not exclusive to the United States. The vestiges of imperialism and colonialism have a very far reach. So I find these discussions, I'm so grateful to be part of this panel and to be among my peers and with the other participants, because it gives an opportunity to really validate the importance of this issue. And I would say in conclusion that what NGOs are doing, because I'm discussing this in the UN, there was an article on October 15th about the race problem within the United Nations, and the fact that disproportionately all of our senior leadership come from Western countries. That's the irony. 193 member states, and we have the same issue. And the UN has been shamed into addressing this issue. I left because of a lack of career mobility and opportunity within the United Nations. And so there were gender issues and race and social justice issues within the humanitarian organization that is charged with setting, the international normative framework for diversity. So I would just say that we're not doing enough. We need to ask for very specific and tangible outcomes, like Asim was suggesting, very tangible metrics that are well articulated empirically. And we need to hold our senior leadership accountable, because right now, while there's a lot of advertising, there's a lot of money being donated, it would be a real travesty if the outcomes a few years later was that we just hired a bunch of equity, diversity, and inclusion chiefs, and we're not holding our elected officials and our corporate leadership responsible for following through on real systemic change. Yeah.
Let me add in something else too, and you brought up, all of you, excellent points. One of the things that we're seeing now is a recognition of the contributions of various minorities. From my own experience, this goes back about 10, 15 years ago. If I said the Tuskegee Airmen, only about 25% of African Americans knew who they were. Only about 5% of the non-African Americans knew who they were. And the only way they became known was because of a couple movies, The Red Tails being one, which we won't talk about its authenticity. But there's other things, like the work of the African American women in NASA was not known until the movie The Hidden Figures came out. And actually Phoebe Hayden, who just left her position as the chancellor of Rutgers-Camden, her mother was one of the hidden figures.
Wow.
And the list goes on of the accomplishments of African Americans, of Asian Americans, of Muslim Americans, Hispanics, Latino, Latinxes, but they don't get the recognition, so they almost become invisible. And that's part of our problem, is we have not been willing to give credit to these various groups of people who have made significant accomplishments. I'm done talking. It's 9 o'clock, but would all of you be willing to stay on for a minute or two just to answer any questions that the people who are still on the line would like to ask?
Sure, I can.
Barbara, Ethan, Laura, Kathleen, Victoria, and Nicole, do you have any questions? Please feel free to unmute yourselves.
No, I'm good. Thank you so much, Ira, for the opportunity to learn from everyone.
Okay, I see Victoria's good. Ethan, Laura, Kathleen, Nicole, any other questions? If not, I'm going to thank everybody. Again, our thanks to the JCRC, Jewish Community Relations Council, for being the co-sponsor and making this possible. Our very grateful thanks to our panelists, Jenny, Leslie, Asim, and Ricardo, and also our thanks to Brandon and Michael for making sure that our technical capabilities were there. We couldn't have done it without you. If you haven't already, please put your email address in the chat box. We will send you the slides for today. And also, we will be sending you a follow-up survey to get your feedback, because we can't make this program better without knowing what you thought. And this program is for the students who are part of it. With that, thank you, everybody. We really appreciated you being part of this. Have a good evening.
Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brandon,
All right,
thank you.
thank you.
Ira, thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are we still recording or are we off?
We're still recording. I can hit stop right now.